RTE had to rewrite the rule book because of this man, because he rattled them so much. A podcaster, Counterpoint. If you haven't seen it, then you should be watching it, because Eddie has all the guests and all the people that RTE, News Talk, and all the mainstream media will not platform and will not talk to. Now, you'll find them all with Eddie Hobbs on Counterpoint. I'm going to hand you over to Eddie, last segment of the evening. Eddie, it's all yours.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. What a great period we're in. What a great period we're in. Last Saturday, the Irish people sent a message to this government that they've had enough of it. And you can see them scramble, trying to get back into their former position, because the Uniparty had gone so far to the left. That's why Harris was out gaslighting us the other day, talking about, oh, we're concerned now about the numbers. Yeah, you're not fooling anybody. So I'm not going to focus on local politics in this talk. I want to talk to you, I want to bring you up to speed on where I am with my research and interviews and all the rest of it, and what I think is really happening. And this is tough stuff. And you need to listen carefully while I outline it, because you're better off hearing the sour truth than the sweet lies. And that's the truth of it. So where we are, we're at war globally. We've always been there, but it's very apparent that this type of 21st century totalitarianism has got an extraordinarily complex and dangerous game afoot. That is the truth of it. And this is different from what has gone before, but it is not different in the sense that for thousands of years empires have attempted to terraform. And we saw that ourselves, for example, in our own plantations. Lee Shoffley, just called them out to you very briefly, 1556 to 1570. Then you had the Munster plantation. You had the Ulster plantation that followed. Then you had the Cromwellian plantation, which was the worst of all, even by global standards, which killed up to 40% of the Irish population by either warfare or disease. And then you had, of course, the outcome of the Williamite Wars. And as a result of that, the Irish lost. They went from nearly 100% of their land down to about 5%. And then we had the penal laws. So we know all about terraforming as a people. We know all about it. And we got through all that. And we came out on the other side to a famine. So we know what terraforming is. And the way you understand it is, if you look back through history, you see it. The Spanish and the Portuguese cut the South American half between themselves, with the permission of the Pope in 1494. You saw it when the United States of America, over 60 years, through their Manifest Destiny policy, destroyed the Native American population, moved them off their lands and forced them. You saw the worst of all was probably the British. The British, over a period of 350 years in India, ransacked the country. It killed about 50 million people through warfare and disease, and probably another 60 million through engineered famines and disease. And in modern day terms, they took between 40 and 60 trillion of wealth from that country. That was terraforming. And whenever this happens, this is the big game. Every single time there's a plutocracy behind it. Every single time. Because that's what they're in, that's the big game. The rest of it is just the detail. So that's what I want to talk about. And I want to try to get you to understand that this is a long game. It's been going a long time, and we're in a long fight. This isn't a fight that's going to go away easily by just winning, say, the battle over the illegal immigration coming into the country and the terraforming that's going on there. Like if that's won, that's only a very, very small part of the battlefield. So you have to understand what it is. So I want to talk about that. Well, so firstly, what's the objective? Well, the objective is always routes and resources. Resources in particular, because a route is a resource. So Israel was set up, for example, by the British in order to get control of the Suez Canal, to set something up there. the so-called aircraft carrier of the Middle East in the Balfour Declaration. You see it with the Panama Canal. Panama was set up as a country in order to control the Panama Canal. I think that Trump was talking to Putin in Alaska because they're talking about an underground tunnel between America and Russia going out through Alaska. It's always about resources, and it's always been driven by the most powerful groups in the world. Now, I'm not saying that there's an organised kind of Hollywood kind of committee behind it at all. So you'll see these dynasties, these oligarchies everywhere. You see them in China. China has one. Russia has one. Zionism is another. That's not necessarily Judaism. It's completely different. Most of the Zionists are probably American Christians. And so it just hides within it. And these groups are there, and they're pushing the agenda. And you'll know you're not in their club if you were offered a jab when the pandemic hit, because the pandemic was one of their tools. It's not the only one. We'll see it with the attack on farming, with the attack on food, water. All of those things are being used in order to engage in this worldwide. The Japanese are even experiencing illegal immigration. And when you look at it, we went out in 2009 and we said we would vote for Lisbon II a second time, provided we control of our borders. And in June 2024, the Irish government, because I was across the road at the time in Boswell's Hotel, looking at it, aghast, the Irish government used the whip and voted us voluntarily joining the EU Migration Pact. Now, 2 days before that, I was inside in the High Court, a few days before, with Una McGurk trying to get an injunction to stop the Dáil from actually having that vote, because it was not within their power to do it. It should have been put to the people by way of referendum, because it was the people's referendum firstly. Yeah. And that failed, as most attacks on the state fail through the courts. And you have to join the dots to understand why. Who pays for the courts? I'm not saying that there aren't judges out there that are fiercely independent. I'm simply saying that when the state is challenged, things happen in a very different way. We also see that when you look at the extraordinary stuff that's happened in the Irish property market since we handed the place over to vulture funds back in the day, getting tax-free returns and squashing those people that were in debt. That game continues on today, and it is built on a gigantic fraud that involves the state. Yeah. And that fraud is after separating the actual property itself from the security on the property, and selling an interest in the security of the property to receivers who turn up in court and pretend that they actually have legal title when they don't. The state intervened in 2015, 2016 in the Finance Act to try it, and they just made it even more complicated in their favour. So Ireland was subject to a soft coup, and this took place when we were too busy looking down at our shoes in disgrace during the so-called bailout from the Troika. It was at the time that Enda Kenny was in Davos telling all of the billionaire class that we have your backs. It was they who went mad, borrowing. They, the people. It's the people's fault. So we carried the burden of French and German banks and bailed out Europe on our backs because the Fine Gael establishment decided that's the way it was going to play out. Immediately after that, Irish civil servants and diplomats were involved in the formulation of the United States Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them, along with some Kenyans. And that was ratified by the United Nations in 2015. And it has been the hidden programme for government of Ireland ever since. It's why we joined the EU Migration Pact. Because those 17 goals, 40% of them can't be achieved unless you have open and lax borders. It's why we joined it. Now, I'm not saying that those engaged in all of that on the Irish side are aware of all of this. They're simply the managerial class. They're minnows and they would be targeted like everybody else for dislocation just as easily as we would, the dissenters. This is a big game, and it's global. When you look at the international migration industry, I reckon, based recent calculation, there's about 20 billion going into it. It flows principally through the United Nations, UNHCR. And the UNHCR, of course, had Peter Sutherland as its advocate back in 2012. Sutherland was also involved, I believe, in the negotiations around what we were going to do with bailing out the banks. Varadkar went on to become a member of the WF Young Leaders Group. And Davos was the meeting point for all of these oligarchies in the different areas to come together to discuss matters of mutual concern. Now, they could just as easily end up squabbling and fighting with one another as well. But the agenda is always the same. It's asset grabbing, it's terraforming, it's power, and it is, most importantly of all, it is the progression of their family dynasties across generations. That the seed would not end with the winning of a particular billionaire class in one century, would carry forward. Now, why do we know this? Well, we can go back to 1884. I'm going to get my notes here. When we had you had in 1848, you had, of course, the Communist Manifesto. That was allegedly financed by finance coming out of Wall Street banks. There was an attempt then to set up a communist state in Paris in 1872 during the Franco-Prussian War, and it was crushed by the French National Army at the loss of about 1,000 troops, but they killed between 10 and 20,000 communards on the streets of Paris. In 1884, the Fabian Society was established. Now, this is a critical point. The next year, the London School of Economics, and that was by Sidney and Beatrice Webb. And who was their greatest advocate immediately joining the Fabian Society? Anybody guess? George Bernard Shaw, yeah. Now, isn't that interesting? When you look across the decades and then you see Peter Sutherland up to his neck in it. I mean, he couldn't have become chairman of Goldman Sachs without the agreement of the Bank for International Settlements. So the world has two power structures. I'm talking now about structures, not what happens behind those structures. And that's the Bank for International Settlements, which controls the banking system, which was set up in 1931. And it was run by largely American and Nazi industrialists for the next 10 or 20 years, including throughout the Second World War. Henry Ford, Bella Corkman, he had a plant in Frankfurt during the 1930s, along with other American oligarchs. He was helping to build the Nazi war machine throughout the 1930s. One of them, I think it was DuPont, got a medal from Hitler towards the end of the 1930s for the wonderful work that the American industrial had done and helped building Germany back up into a war machine, and we all know what happened after that. So this is an old game. So when you go back to the Fabian Society, whenever you get something like this going, the plutocrats immediately buddy up with it, because what plutocracy wants is very simple. They want monopolies. They don't want to compete. They want to own the game, own the energy, own the land, own the food, own the water, and own the human population. Ideally, control them through central bank digital currency, which will capture your carbon limit, your vaccines, your ability to travel, what you spend it on, and so on. That's the ideal goal. Now, will they achieve it? I don't believe they will. But that is their intent. And they're accelerating that agenda because they know that they're losing a grip on the great game. Trump went into the United Nations. Whether you like him or don't like him, and I don't particularly like him as a personality, but he represented an American strategy. And he went into the United Nations just a few weeks ago. It was hardly covered in the Irish media except just to throw more tropes at him. And he basically told the United Nations, he said to them two things. He said, climate change is a hoax. Yeah. Yeah. So all of the green tax, and now I'll be interviewing Dr. Judith Curry for the second time on Thursday night on her book about all of this. So, watch out for that program coming out on Counterpoint. It doesn't take too much examination or analysis to see that it has a hoax. It's a hoax in plain sight. But like climate change and climate and health pandemics were chosen a long time ago as the way that you build fear. And it's only when a population is in fear that you can really control them. I mean, the Nazis, Goebbels was constantly talking about that. This is the currency of terraforming. It's the currency of the most powerful people on the planet. And it is their intention that we should be controlled. The difference is in the 21st century, they now have the technology to do it. They didn't have it in the last century, where warfare was about, literally boots on the ground in very large regions. You can now actually conquer the world from your PC. That's the truth of it, isn't it? And when you look at all of the members of the Oireachtas, including the good ones on our side, they don't talk this language because this language isn't being discussed. It isn't being discussed because in part of the weaponry is the free speech bills throughout the world that have been enacted. Those bills are designed to get people to stop talking, especially about the invasion, which is what it is, by illegal immigration coming in, because they're being trafficked in. That's its purpose. Its purpose is to keep us down. Crappie, lie down. That's its purpose. It failed last year, but it's still on the back burners. And all of this is orchestrated. All of the vectors of attack are interconnected. It's not by happenstance. I used to think that. It took me 3 or 4 years to figure all this out. I'm still learning. And I'm just passing on where I am today on it. I do know, for example, like COVID, we all know this at this stage. I mean, COVID was a massive psychological operation. We know from the results of the study by it'll come to me in a moment, the Canadian group study, that there was 33 million excess deaths globally. But none of it was from a pathogen. It was from 3 sources. One, it was from medical mismanagement at the outset, from elderly, getting them out of hospitals and getting them into nursing homes and then intubating them. That was the first wave. The second wave was lockdown itself, which have never happened. It was against all health science. Lockdown killed more people and caused a huge increase in mental health problems. And then, of course, the MNRA jabs came in. And this, Rancourt was his name, Dennis Rancourt. I hope to interview him too shortly. And him and his team studied, I think, around 2.5 billion population, around 70 countries. And it's quite clear from all the graphs that the MNRA vaccine moved in direct line, including during summer when there's no Gompertz curve from a pathogen, from a so-called pandemic. It shouldn't have happened during the summer. So it's quite clear that MNRA vaccines had accelerated the level of excess deaths. The study by Dowd in Hawaii and his team shows that for every 1 excess death, there's 4 disabilities. And there was 33 million excess deaths. So these are staggering numbers. But of course, there was a staggering number of jabs, 13.5 billion, across 5.5 billion people. Ireland is just a speck on that. So you would say, well, what was the point of all of that? And the answer was to land the World Health Organization treaty, so that they would then have control over animal health, plant health, human health, and ecosystems in our country, over and across the Dáil. People say, well, what can you do about it in the Dáil? Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Because the Dáil doesn't have any power. It's just a middleman. I got a phone call from a senior civil servant some weeks ago telling me that, we go up, voluntarily rang me out of the blue, don't know the person at all, telling me that the thing that the establishment fear the most is, guess what? Irish women. Because they fear their mothers the most. And what you've got to do is get the women mobilised, and the men will follow, because we have a matriarchal society. What we have to do as a people is we have to stand up and say no, and be prepared to stand up. Because the people stood up anonymously last Saturday, and we could see the result of that. We have to stand up at our family tables, despite the opposition you may face. In our local communities, in our coffee shops. How many people have you spoken to in this manner over the last couple of weeks? We have to stand up, one by one by one. Only when we stand up, and carry people across to see to see what's going on, only then can we win. And if you're looking for those that have stood up so far, you just have to look at Poland and Hungary to see what happens when people stand up. George Soros and his transgenderism was thrown out of Hungary. The Poles have closed their borders and said, no, we will take in Ukrainians. We are not going to take in what you're taking in. The Swedes are describing their country as a low-level civil war. The Dutch have lost their country. Luxembourg have lost their country. 50% of the population is not a native population. Ireland has the benefit of being last to the party, but the most enthusiastic to destroy their own culture. Not just with this illegal immigration, but with transgenderism, because they were ignoring the Cass report next door, because the Irish media itself is captive to the state. It's taking the state coin at 7.5 million a year, and of course RT 720 million. They're deeply compromised. We're on our own. That's the point. We can't rely on the medical establishment because they're deeply compromised, as we can see from COVID. We can't rely on the political establishment. We can't rely on the permanent establishment. And we can't rely, at least we couldn't rely on the last president, who only referred one bill to the Supreme Court in 14 years and was actually the president on site during the attack on civil rights during the COVID period when we went through a phantom pandemic. I'm not saying there wasn't a problem. What I'm saying is that in 2009, the definition of a pandemic was changed to take away morbidity and mortality and make it all about infectability. And the minutes to that meeting at the WHO are not available. They're not available. Neither are the minutes to the decision for the world to go into lockdown. Neither are the minutes in Ireland of the decision to go into lockdown. The minutes aren't available. Like, this is the kind of conversation we have to be having with our next door neighbour. Not the thick Egypt that is never going to change because they're deep in cognitive dissonance. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the great number in the middle, the 50 or 60% that smell a rat but just haven't looked at the information. They haven't sat down and had a conversation. Now, my next step in attempting to bring the solution to bear, because this is complex stuff and it needs complex solutions. My next book, which I'll be bringing out at the end of this year, is called The Assembly of Critical Thinking. Because critical thinking has been disassembled using technology for the last numbers of years. We no longer get together in groups and engage in collaborative thinking exercises through puzzles we want to solve. Instead, we're being corralled into echo chambers and we're being fed propaganda non-stop, day by day. And critical thinking levels have collapsed throughout the world with the technology as a consequence of all of that. So that's my job. I'm also staying in the media game only. I've absolutely no intention whatsoever in my worst dream of going into public life. Right? That's not my destiny. My job is to build a media platform upon which a new political movement can take root. That's my job. And that's what I'm doing. So, what I'm saying in finishing is that there is enough power in this room, in your own communities, to begin the force of change that's required. To start telling people that we are in a state of war. It's not just about the borders. It goes way beyond that. It goes into our communities. They tried to change the definition of family itself. They've completely confused the children. They're trying to groom children into affirmation ideology. All of it is interconnected. All of it is designed to break the bonds of homogenous society, because only when you break the bonds in Ireland can you control it. Well, let me say to those that are on the other side, well, pals, that has been tried many times before. We've gone through all the plantations, the penal laws, the famine, and we've come out the other side, and we are still the Irish people. And the Irish people we will remain, because we're going to fight this goddamn thing. Thank you.